10, gangs and guns, gangs and drugs, threats to our security. Learn objectives, understand the major trends regarding gangs in the United States, identify the basic types of gangs and which ones represent the greatest threat currently, describe the distinguishing characteristics of gangs, explain what the most important risk factors of becoming a gang member probably is, discuss the 5 strategies of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Comprehension Gang Model, list of controlled substances, identify the national drug threat assessments as the nation's greatest drug threats, summarize the core components of the National Drug Control Policy. The 2015 National Gang Report. This is a report that came out in 2015. It replaced the previous report, and it broke down the statistics of gang activity in the United States. So when we look at this, the respondents are law enforcement agencies, and half of the respondents report gang activity, membership in gang-related crime. So when you look at half the country, we're saying that they were seeing gang-related incidents and gang-related crime. 1/3 of the jurisdictions report an increase in threats to law enforcement. So some of these places, the gang member has gotten so brazen, they're now threatening law enforcement. And this is times what you see in different countries like Mexico and Colombia, where you're beginning to see it happen in the United States too. Usually it's happening on the local level, where these guys will encounter local law enforcement and they see them on a daily basis and they get brazen and emboldened, and then they start to threaten local law enforcement. 68% of the respondents indicate that prison gang membership has increased. So they're seeing the prison gang population grow. And realistically, if you think about it, I'll talk more about the prison gangs in a minute, but this is something right here was a very disturbing trend when we start seeing it growing in the prisons. Cross-border crimes. Start seeing more crimes happening. We got 12,000 miles of border between the United States and Mexico. And so when you look at the border down there, you look at all these miles, there's a lot of places where people can cross. So now you got criminals crossing, but they're committing crimes. They're coming across to commit crimes and then going back. Domestic extremist groups. So you have these domestic extremist groups like militias and some of these hate groups and anti-government, militias and anti-government groups. So they're getting in bed with some of these gangs because they're finding that they have some of the same ideologies, but they found out their relationships can actually be beneficial. Human trafficking. We start seeing more and more human trafficking. A lot of times we're talking about females and children. And a lot of that is associated with sex trafficking, technology, and illicit activities. So something else when you start seeing is these groups and gangs, they're younger, but one of the things is this, many of them high school dropouts didn't go to college, but they are tech savvy. And they started using technology such as social media and the internet to help them with their illicit activities. Remember, you can go worldwide when you utilize the internet and you utilize social media. Street gangs. So these they form on the street and they operate in neighborhoods. So these are the ones, a lot of times they will come up in an area and everybody knows them because they grew up there. And rather than become law-abiding citizens, they form gangs and they stay in their communities. And what they do is they victimize their communities, basically. You have Hispanic and Latin American gangs. This is where these guys come from other countries. Some are born here, some come from other countries. And a lot of times when they come here from other countries and they're illegal, some of the first thing they do is they can't find jobs. So what they do is they join gangs. But again, this is also in the areas where they predominantly live. African American gangs. Here's some of the 2 most popular. The Crips and the Bloods. And this is when you think about them, you always think about California and Los Angeles, but they're in other parts of the country now too. Now they started there, they've migrated to other places. And again, same thing here. They're operating primarily in African American communities. Asian gangs, a lot of them, the origin, a lot of them is from the West Coast. Some of them with these Asian gangs, these people, some of them came here illegally from Asia and set up shop in the United States to grow their criminal enterprises. White ethnic gangs, you have them as well. When you look at it, you have like like the Russians, the Ukrainians. You have various types of those. Even some when you look at it, different types of groups from not only just from Europe, but either from different parts of South America and other places. And you have females in gangs also. Now, they make up a small percentage of that. And a lot of times they don't have leadership roles. They have these different roles and stuff where they do things where they're doing complementary things and stuff for these organizations, but they are in there. And make no mistake about it, with some of these females, some of them are gun-toting gang members, and some of them will kill you just as fast as a man would. And of course, you have just criminal gangs. These people are folks that get together as a result of opportunity. We've even seen situations where in some of these criminal gangs, some of them actually have criminal ties, gang ties to other groups. For instance, I actually heard of an instance one time where a few Bloods and a few Crips had gotten together and formed a criminal gang, all for the purpose of making money. And these people were historically been lifelong feuding enemies, but few of them got together to make money and formed a criminal gang. Outlaw motorcycle gangs. These gangs are gangs that form, these are primarily white males. A lot of times they don't allow people of color in these organizations. They have some racist tendencies, but they're into drugs, extortion, slavery, prostitution, debt collection, money laundering. And a lot of times with them, they can be very violent too. Now, unlike some of these other organizations, I have seen where they will set up their motorcycle outlaw gang house, their clubhouse. They'll set them up in places that you wouldn't believe. I even saw one where it was set up in a predominantly African-American neighborhood. Yes, it was. And what they did at Thanksgiving and Christmas, they handed out turkeys and toys to people in the community. Now, why did they do that? Black people can't join their organization, but they have a clubhouse in the neighborhood where black people primarily live. But by doing that at Thanksgiving and Christmas, anytime the police came around, those black people would call and let them know. So they knew what they were doing. Routinely and systematically exploit and infiltrate law enforcement and business. One of the things that these gangs like to do is they like to have people who can keep their ear close to the ground, particularly with local law enforcement, have people who are in local law enforcement or trying to get in local law enforcement, or people who are sympathetic in local law enforcement. One of the things I've seen is a lot of times if they find a female that may be in local law enforcement, they would try their best to befriend her or get someone try to date her or whatever else to get her to give them information. And once upon a time, it was one of the presidents or the attorney general or somebody made a statement that 99% of the people who ride motorcycles are law-abiding citizens. Only 1% of the people are hardened criminals. They actually like that title, and they call themselves one percenters. And you would see it on some of their patches, on some of their jackets and vests. Prison gangs, they originate in the penal system. These gangs this is where people have gone into prison, might not have been gang members, not necessarily gang members, but they join one while they're in there. Now, here's the trick about that is once they join that gang, many of them don't stay in prison forever. So they come out. So you have, it's a prison gang, but it might be out on the streets now. And this is how it formed in prison, but they don't stay in prison. They get out and they hook back up, and then they start doing criminal stuff. But it is considered a criminal gang. Self-perpetrating in and out of prison, exactly what I'm talking about. They go in and out. So when they go back in, they get with their folks inside. It provides them protection and a way of life. When they're out on the streets, it provides them a way to make money. They like to teach small criminals. They like to get with small criminals and young folks and teach them how to do petty stuff and get them started early and young and groom them. And eventually, as they get older, the goal is to bring them into the organization. 100% of correctional facility respondents report notable increase. So 100% of the correctional facilities in the United States have seen the prison gangs and have seen an increase in it, which tells you how this problem is actually growing. So characteristics of gangs. So when you look at the gangs and stuff, based upon the type of gang it is, you see the types of criminal activities it may be in. Is it drug trafficking? Is it sex trafficking? Is it extortion? All these different types of things that they could be in. Firearms trafficking, drug trafficking, you name it. And that'll tell you, a lot of times you can look to see what type of activity may tell you what type of organization it is. The organization and how they set up. These things are set up in various ways when you look at them and stuff. Some of them have a almost like a dictator type leader. Some of them have like a panel, a group of people who actually lead. And some of them are set up more like the military, law enforcement type hierarchy, their organization, their leadership. The domain identification is their territory. What is their territory? Is it the west side, the east side? Is it this city? Is it that county? And anytime that you have people that cross over, another gang that cross over into their domain, there's always violence associated with that, because it's a territory that the gang members are supposed to respect. And sometimes they make a mistake or whatever else and cross over in there. And a lot of times that results in some very bad consequences. The symbols, they have all their own symbols and stuff. They have their own symbols, codes, and signs and stuff. Graffiti that's associated with these gangs. Their names. So when you look at their names, a lot of times they get their names like be the 5th Street Warriors, the 10th Street Gangsters. It might be after a street. It might be after community. Washington, the Washington Killers, based on the community that they live in. It could be the Max Hill Marauders. That might be 2 streets where Max and Hill Street come together. So you'll see those kind of things. The gangs have the subculture, and in the subculture, one of the things you look at is this. A lot of the folks before they join the gangs have actually been victims of violence themselves as young individuals. So they grew up usually and been victims of violence. And as they get older, they join a gang and then they become the people who are doing the victimization. So why do people join gangs? So there's a couple of different theories here that we're going to talk about. The first one is social disorganization. And I'm going to read the definition of each one of these. So when you look at that, you look at social disorganization. Crime stems from certain community or neighborhood characteristics such as poverty, dilapidated housing, high density, high mobility, and high rates of unemployment. So by virtue of where they come from, and they come from such a depressed and bad economic area, you see, they're like, you know what? Anything's better than this. And one of the things the gangs tells me is stuff, we're going to give you a better life. We're going to help you live better. You are nobody, poor and hungry. We're going to make you a somebody. You're going to have money and you're going to have power. So they join. Strain or anomaly. So cultural norms of success emphasize such goals as money, status, power, but the means to obtain such successes are not equally distributed. As a result of blocked opportunities, many among the disadvantaged resort to illegal means which are more readily available. So when they don't have ways to make legal living, then they resort to other ways. It's basically what some people tell you is survival. I've heard people tell me that before, why they do crimes and stuff. It's the means for survival. Cultural deviance. Certain subcultures include gang subculture, exist within poor communities, which contain values, attitudes, beliefs, norms. So they are often counter to the prevailing middle class culture. An important feature of the culture is the absence of fathers, thus resulting in female-headed households, which tend to be poor. Youth get exposed to subculture early in life and become embedded in it. So I've seen this personally. With a lot of these situations, the young men, they don't have a father. I've seen situations where you have 3 generations of women who've had children and none of them had a husband. And they had multiple children by multiple men. So growing up that way, they don't have good role models. One of the things you find is the gang will give you a role model. Control of social bond. Delinquency persists when youth bonds or ties to society are weakened or broken, especially bonds with family, school, and other institutions. When this occurs, a youth is apt to seek bonds with other groups. So when they don't have social bonds with positive things, a family, a church, a school, or any type of community center, then they'll develop bonds with other things. A gang is one of the things that they'll do. They'll see it and they'll look and they'll see like, man, These guys really act like a family. They take care of each other, and they'll see it and they will crave that. Learning. Delinquency is learned through association with others, especially gang members, over a period of time. This involves a process that includes the acquisition of attitudes and values, the instigation of criminal act based on certain stimuli. So they learn how to be criminals. They teach them. Look, remember when they come into the gang stuff, what they know about is being poor, not having, and wanting, and craving. They teach them, we're going to show you how to get all of that. So they learn you how to be a criminal. Labeling. Definitions of delinquency and crime stem from differences in power and status in the larger society. And those without power are most likely to have their behaviors labeled as delinquency. Delinquency may be generated, especially perpetrated, through negative labeling by significant others. So when you get labeled basically a loser, low class, a delinquent, people start to believe that. So realistically, so they don't fit in with other people. They don't see the American, they're not living the American dream, and they don't see how they're going to get it living like people in middle and upper class, because they'll never be that the way they see things. Rational choice. People freely choose to commit crime based on self-interest because they are goal-oriented and want to maximize their pleasure and minimize their pain. So when you look at the rational choice, they make a choice. I can go without, or I can get. And if I can get it, it don't matter how I get it, as long as I get it. And I can reduce, how I live in, my pain. I can reduce how I'm eating, my pain. I can reduce my suffering by going out here and getting with these guys and getting money and getting cars and getting girls and buying food and doing things of that effect. Critical or Marxist. Gangs are inevitable products of social and racial inequity brought about by capitalism itself. Power is unequal, distributed, and those without power often resort to criminal means of survival. So when you look at it, that theory is like, by virtue of us having a capitalistic society where we pride ourselves on getting ahead and prosper and stuff, what they're basically saying is this. That theory says, well, the ones who don't do that, they have to do something else. What did you expect them to do? And the risk factors, when you look at the family structure, when you have situations where you have folks who don't have family structure, I can tell you a lot of times these are people, in many cases, not always, but many cases, who are at high risk for committing crimes, joining gangs, getting pregnant, underage, having multiple children, this out of wedlock, all these things when there's no family structure and no guidance. So responding to this, so when we look at primary prevention, this is when you're doing things for the community, trying to help the community as a whole, trying to help the kids in the community, trying to help the teen girls with pregnancy, trying to help the adults with jobs. You're looking at basically how do we help the community by providing things for the community, a community center to get the kids off the streets. Secondary prevention is when you're concentrating on the children between 7 and 14 years old. What do we do with them? Remember, this is the age right here where the gangs would actually start targeting them. So either you provide things for the community to help them, or you let the gangs do it. If you don't, they will. Intervention is when you have individuals who go in and out of prison. When they come back, what do you have for these individuals to do to keep them from going back into crime, joining the gang? Some of them don't want to, but if he gets hungry and he doesn't have a place to live, he's also going to make a decision about how to survive. And it may be, in his eyes, is to go back to the gang. You want to prevent that, the intervention of that, keep them from going back. Suppression. This is when you go into the neighborhoods and you look at removing the gang leaders. You say you might have a gang problem, but who's causing the problem? Well, that might be the folks that's leading the gangs. So you go in and look at getting them out. Some other things, you look at gang sweeps, removing the gangs as a whole from the community, targeting the gangs, stop and frisk. Gangs view that as kind of like a harassment. Well, basically, they feel like they're being harassed by law enforcement because law enforcement is always around stopping and frisking when they legally, when they think they should. Some of them may find a way to say, you know what, I need to get out of this area, get out of the gang, get out of this area. The gang, TECC. So when we look at this, this was an initiative that was basically brought down by the federal government that basically helped communities to try to deal with gang violence at the local grassroots area. How it gave them money and opportunities and stuff, programs to help them to try to combat gang membership and violence that works. You have injunctions. You have injunctions injunctions that are placed on gang members. In certain cities, they have gang members and stuff. They have gang units, and they document the gang members. Whenever people get arrested, one of the things they look for is gang tattoos and colors they're wearing. Put them into the gang database, and one of the things you see in injunctions is this: gang members can't, in this area of the city, gang members can't hang out. If you do, we're running you in. That's an injunction. You pass legislation to deal with the gang problem. That's legally, laws and stuff to deal with that. You got to look at the reentry. People coming back into the communities and stuff. Again, dealing with that. How do you deal with when they come back? Reentry. Bottom line is this: some gang members leave and then they come back. Well, now you have to address that reentry of these members when they do come back. Comprehensive gang model. The problem: lack of social opportunity available. Degree of social disorganization. So when they don't have social opportunities available that other people have, that other children have and other communities have, that presents a problem. Again, when you have people, when they're lacking and they're needing stuff and they don't have it, they will find ways to get it. And a lot of times it's not legal. The degree of social disorganization in community. How bad is your social disorganization? Do you have a community that you have no families? When I say families, no two-parent households, a lot of unwed mothers, a lot of young men who's got multiple children before the age of 21, a lot of children who are arrested as juveniles. That's social disorganization in community. When you have that, that is a major problem. Strategies, community mobilization. You got to get people together in these communities to come together. That's it. I'll give you an example. That could be your community center. That could be houses of worship. That could be law enforcement. That could be the mayor's office, the fire department located in the area, all types of things. Opportunities provision. You got to find ways to try to create some opportunities for folks. Give them something to look forward to, something that they can actually do beneficial. There's an old saying, an idle mind is a devil's workshop. Well, not only is it the devil's workshop just for how they think, but for whatever they do. So you have to give them some type of opportunity. Social intervention, get involved. Encourage people to get involved socially. Some of the things that you see when you're trying to restore the community is how people get involved in communities and stuff. For one of the great things, like a Boys and Girls Center, it might be a great place for something like that. Suppression. You got to suppress the violence, you got to suppress the crime, and you got to suppress the gangs. But you got to do it all legally. Organization change and development. You want to change the situation, the environment, and you want to change where the people live, and you want to develop something totally new for them. And you got to get them to see it. If people see better times and see peace and see harmony, they will want it. One thing I can tell you is this: people can't want something they've never seen and they don't understand. If they believe and they live in a community where only people die and kill and sell dope and rob and steal, then that's what everybody does, because that's the norm. You got to change that. Now, here is a problem that affects our country, but this is an international problem. The Mexican drug cartels, the drug cartels, the Mexican drug war, Mexican drug trafficking organizations are the biggest organized crime threat. These organizations, these cartels, they are organizations. They are like armies. They are well armed, they are well equipped, they're well funded, and they're well organized. And they have a lot of corrupt people in multiple countries working with them to help them do what they do. These cartels operate not just U.S. border, but Canadian border, the Atlantic coast. They're all over, and they present a lot of problems. And in order to deal with that, we're going to talk about how our country is trying to combat this. And here's how. Controlled Substance Act of 1984. This is where the federal government classified drugs into like 5 different categories based upon their use, their effect, and how it makes people feel. And it's referred to as Schedule 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. More than 120 people in the U.S. die every day as a result of drug overdose. When you talk about that, that's not one drug. Look at the different types. We're talking about controlled prescription drugs, heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, marijuana, synthetic designer drugs. I once heard a person, a drug enforcement officer, a narcotics investigator, I should say. I think he was with the NYPD. And he said, in our country, we don't have a drug problem. And people looked at him like he was crazy. What is he talking about? Yes, we do. He said, no, we don't. He said, because if you could eradicate drugs today and there be no drugs for people to get high, tomorrow somebody will make a new one. He says, we have a people problem, and it's the mindset of the people. He said, drugs wouldn't be coming into America if we weren't craving, if Americans weren't spending the money to buy it and craving it. And hence the synthetic drugs, the designer drugs, these are drugs that people are making. So when we have over-the-counter drugs, robotripping, this is referred to drinking cough syrup to get high. Some of the cough syrups have alcohol in it. So what some of the young people do who can't afford to buy, who are not old enough to buy alcohol, they get their hands on cough syrup and they drink it to get high. And it's referred to as robotripping, hence Robitussin. Farming. Farming is when young kids go through their parents or the household drug drawers to find drugs that they can get high on. That's referred to farming. And in some instances, they will use them. In some cases, they would sell them. Now, I mentioned a couple of slides back, core components, prevention. When we looked at that, and we see the SA, the SAM, HSA. This is the program right here. This is the actual title of that program, that national program that the government gives money down to help combat drug problems and gangs at the grassroots area. This is the actual program. And then there's another program called DARE. And this is the program where we have law enforcement officers and kids in these schools get educated about drugs, and law enforcement officers who come around and educate kids about drugs. And this is a program it's a national program, and it's designed to keep kids off of drugs and out of gangs. And it has been very successful. Early intervention. Early intervention can be a lot of different places. It can be a lot of different things depending upon where it is. But early intervention is when you get involved, have situations to get involved early before they get out of control. You know, when you find out children are flirting around with gangs, when you find out children are beginning to experiment with drugs, that's when you get involved. Not after they've joined a gang, not after they've become a drug addict. Treatment and recovery support. Now, if you don't get involved early, and this does happen, they do become drug addicts or whatever else, what's your treatment and what's your recovery support? You got to have a way to get them off of it. And a lot of times I've seen the best results with the residential programs where people actually leave their home, go to programs to actually get treatment. And then once they get the treatment, what's your recovery support to keep them from going back, relapsing? Criminal justice reform. You have to periodically adjust the criminal justice system, the laws and the legislation to deal with the evolution of drugs. Things change and they come and go. And again, just as that one guy said, if you can get rid of the drugs today, new drugs will be here. The criminal justice system doesn't move that fast. So the criminal justice system is always going to be behind the new trends in drugs. Disrupting production and trafficking. This is very big, and this is where you really need to get involved. This is dealing with the sources. Now that means trying to stop it from coming in. And if you don't stop it from coming in, catching it after it comes in, but before it hits the streets. And that's usually involving your federal government, your federal agencies working with state and local agencies as well to do that. Strengthen the international partnerships. You got to have working relationships with these countries where the origin of these drugs are coming from, i.e. Mexico, Colombia, Central America. You have to have working relationships with them. If you do not, I mean, it's the kiss of death, because that means you have no clue what's going on. One of the things I can tell you, sometimes we do know what's happening in some of these countries because we have people working with them in those countries to identify who's doing what, whatever else. There's one famous drug dealer known as El Chapo that was over a large drug cartel and was very, very well known and stuff. He was apprehended in Mexico. I'm sorry, in Colombia. And when he was apprehended, I think it was Colombia, but it was Mexico or Colombia where he was apprehended, but he was extradited to the United States to stand trial here because his drugs were being sold on the streets of the United States. And we were able to do that because we had working relationships with the country. Improving information systems. You have to have information systems where this stuff is documented. You got to have, this is a lot of times require federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies to have some type of working relationship where they can share some of this information, because one of the things that history has shown us, these criminals are able to operate almost with an impunity when law enforcement agencies don't work together or they don't share information. You have to have drug raids. You have to have situations where you're raiding the drugs and you're actually pulling them off the streets. Surveillance of suspects, drug dealers, drug traffickers, and also surveillance of drug purchasers. Sometimes they will lead you to where the drugs are, to the drug dealer. Follow the drug dealer, you find a drug trafficker. So it's a couple of different ways to do that. Surveillance. Not to mention all the electronic surveillance things that are available for law enforcement. You have the undercover operations. Light cover is when you suspect you know who the drug dealers are and stuff, and it might be doing some light cover to surveillance on them or watching them or whatever it may be. Deep cover is when you have undercover, covert operatives or informants into that organization who are telling you what's going on day by day. You got to arrest the drug traffickers. And you got drug dealers, you arrest them, but ultimately your goal is to get the drug traffickers. You got to get the drug dealers too, but your goal is to work your way up the food chain to try to get to the sources of it. Recognizing individuals using illegal drugs. Recognizing the individuals using illegal drugs is a good thing for law enforcement, because if they're using it, that means they're getting it from somewhere. Again, like I said earlier, then where are they getting it from? Follow this person, talk to this person, arrest this person with drugs on them and ask them where they got them from. A lot of times they will tell you. Source control, getting those sources. You have to get to the sources of who's bringing this stuff in, who's moving the most weight, the sources of it. And those are ultimately what you want to sever. Interdiction, destroying a line of communications. Okay, these people communicate. So you got to have interdictions to intercept that. Find out exactly how they're operating, where they're going, who's conveying messages, who's sending mail, who's emailing information, whatever else. You got to have interdiction. And that, like I said, that involves the federal government there. That concludes this chapter.